Hi everyone, so welcome to this first episode of Media, which is a series of podcasts about pretty much any subject that interests me, may it be books, TV series, movies, nerd stuff in general, really. And as it is said on the title, my name is Arena, and today, for the first episode, we'll be talking about Beauty and the Beast, more particularly the 2017 adaptation. So, I know it's a bit of an old topic at this point, especially because the movie came out nearly a year and a half ago, but I have to say, this is a bit of a therapy episode for me. I personally believe you shouldn't really spend your time just hating on things you hate and concentrate on things you like, but ranting about something you dislike can be a bit of a catharsis experience. And I'm saying this because I do intend to talk about fandoms in general in an upcoming podcast, negativity in general, but before I start, I don't really want to look like a hypocrite off the bat. So yeah, you can talk about things you dislike, or why you think this book, or this movie, or this character doesn't work. And every person is different, and they'll have a different perception of things. But the real problem is when you actively try to stop and shame people for liking that thing, and you just can't let it go, which obviously is a problem and gets tiring for other people real fast. But obviously this isn't the topic for today, and I did try to base myself on facts as much as I can, even though I will admit right from the start that, yes, to an extent, I am biased. We all are about certain things. And I have to make this small disclaimer introduction because fandoms as of late have become, how can I say this, hypersensitive? I don't mean this in a way that's dismissive, and if you like the 2017 movie, that's fine with me. I don't really fault anyone for liking it, but I do have my problems with it. So, Beauty and the Beast was my favorite Disney movie when I was a kid, and when I was a little girl, I wanted to be like Belle. And honestly, I think she's a Disney princess I'm the most similar to. We're both bookworms and everything, so obviously, when they announced they were making a live action remake of Beauty and the Beast, I was pretty excited. So keep in mind that I had fallen in love with a similar live action remake of a Disney movie. That was Cinderella, and I loved it, and I still do. So, when the news about the casting came in, I was pretty excited. I thought they had a stellar cast assembled and everything. And then I saw that the director was Bill Condon, aka the guy behind both parts of Twilight Breaking Dawn. But I looked up the rest of his resume. I saw some good biopics in there, which kind of made me wonder why the Disney executives just went like, this guy, I want him for the Beauty and Beast movie. So, a year after the movie came out, I've realized that him being chosen as the director actually makes perfect sense. So, what happened with the adaptation of Breaking Dawn is that Stephanie Meyer had a lot of input on it, which explains why we got the most anti anticlimactic battle of all time, since that's a very Stephanie Meyer thing to do. And it also kind of gives credence to the belief going around that Bill Condon is one of those yes man kind of directors, and for me, Beauty and the Beast pretty much proved it. So already, Beauty and the Beast is a musical movie. When you're adapting a musical, well, you're already kind of limited. You can't really bring big changes to the plot or whatever. So what I mean by big changes to the plot, that's because I have a bit of a conspiracy theory concerning the movie. So not long before the movie came out, a young adult novel was released, and that was Lost in the Book by Jennifer Donnelly. So when I read it after the movie came out and everything, and basically I read it and I said to myself, look, this would actually make a good movie. Like, really good. Why didn't they just go for it? So, here's my theory. And again, that's when I get into conspiracy theory territory. So, it's entirely possible Jennifer Donnelly is the one who elaborated the whole story and everything. And if it's the case, Mrs. Donnelly, you're probably not listening, but I'll still say this. Kudos for the wonderful story where Belle really felt like Belle, unlike in the live action movie, and I wholeheartedly apologize for what's to come. So, for me, it's also possible that the story in Lost in a Book is actually what they initially planned for the live action movie. But the Disney execs rejected it because, you know, for some reasons, it was too risky. Because let's face it, y'all wanted to see Ewan McGregor singing Be My Guest and Emma Thompson singing Beauty and the Beast, so of course, if they had announced they were not doing any musical numbers and going for an original story, well, people would have lost their minds. So they went for the safer route, adapting the musical because, according to them, it would be the one way of ensuring everyone would be satisfied. And, it's really a case of money and popularity versus creativity. And the media industry these days, it's really a plague. And if you look at Disney's history, Beauty and the Beast is one of their greatest jewels, basically. So, of course, The Little Mermaid is the first movie in the Renaissance era, but Beauty and the Beast is the one movie that really got Disney out of the gutter, as you would say. So, long story short, the Dark Age was a hard time for Disney. So one of their movies from that time, The Black Cauldron, flopped so bad it's I heard it's actually pretty hard to find a copy of the movie nowadays. Disney parks were in financial trouble. However, before Walt Disney died, he did leave behind a few ideas and outlines for movies, just in case the studio would get desperate and wouldn't know what to do anymore. So in the late 80s, the situation was just that desperate. So among some of the ideas Disney had kept away for desperate times, there was, of course, The Little Mermaid, The Snow Queen, which would later become Frozen, and Beauty and the Beast. So, with The Little Mermaid, they decided to change a few things. So, made the heroine a bit more proactive, give her all sorts of facial expressions. I'm giving examples. Of course, I am aware there are a few criticisms you can make about The Little Mermaid nowadays, but they did notice that a lot of the new changes they had brought, even if it may look like baby steps to us nowadays, well, people like them. So they kept them in mind for Beauty and the Beast. But what was really the definitive movie that brought Disney out of trouble was Beauty and the Beast. So just to give you an idea, believe it or not, there was an Academy Award for Best Animated Film for a very long time, mainly because animated movies are for kids and therefore it's not true cinema. Which is obviously bullshit. But Beauty and the Beast was just that good, to the point it was nominated for Best Picture, so for your information, it lost to Silence of the Lambs. And it also won Best Soundtrack, Best Original Song, so of course, since movies for kids couldn't ever be nominated for Best Picture, because only serious movies should be nominated for Best Picture, they create their own category, so that's why they created the Academy Award for Best Animated Film. So it's understandable, though really a shame, that Disney was pretty hands-on when it came to that movie adaptation. However, this doesn't excuse how this remake is almost shot for shot exactly similar to the original animated film. So usually you hire a director because you want them to bring their own vision. Take something old and making something new. In the case of Beauty and the Beast, it's almost plagiarizing. So, yeah, Disney is on some sort of unholy conquest to rule the world of cinema, and they plagiarize themselves, which is honestly pretty amusing. And when they added stuff, either it just added plot holes to a plot that was otherwise really tight knitted and really held together, either it was just the most basic, cliched, generic kind of feminism to a point you could rename the live action Beauty and Beast I'm Not Like Other Girls in the movie. And the whole I'm not like other girls shtick is one big pet peeve of mine, but I'll talk about it later. So yeah, Bill Condon probably did as he was told, and Beauty and the Beast became the second highest grossing movie of 2017. Why? Nostalgia factor, and I admit I fell into that trap at first. So, I had my reservations going into the movie because I had heard some things. And when it came out, there were some things that kind of annoyed me, but overall, I was pleased. You know, I grinned like an idiot during all of Be My Guest. I was covering my mouth while it seemed like that Lumiere and his companions were doomed to become objects forever. Well, I knew very well it wasn't going to be the case. And the nostalgia factor is powerful, and that's why they're making remakes of absolutely everything instead of being creative and making something new. So, some media manage to, grab the nostalgia factor and twist it in a way that makes it, smart and creative. But Beauty and Beast is a case of the nostalgia factor being used in the most lackluster way possible. And it's lackluster because once the haze of the nostalgia factor just wears away, you start seeing the flaws in the machine. And in my case, when I saw the movie for a second time, it hit me like a truck. And now, if you ask me what my opinion about the movie is, well, I think for one, it's pretty mediocre, even if it's the second highest grossing movie of the year. Thank you, Last Jedi, for saving the day. And yes, The Last Jedi is a good movie, albeit not for the reasons you think it is. And it has problems, albeit not for the reasons you think there is. But, I'm gonna make a podcast about it one day. And I probably lost half of my audience. Yay! So, I think it's going to be forgotten pretty quickly, Beauty and Beast movie, I mean, because it's really a pale copy of the original animated film that will turn 27 years old this year, and, it still holds up pretty well. I think most people actually already forgot the live action movie, which, is part of why I kind of debated on making this podcast the first, because again, it's kind of an old topic, but as I said, I'm doing this for therapy and everything, but, good stuff is coming, don't worry. But, sadly enough, one of the biggest problems with the movie, and it's probably what makes it a lesser thing than the original animated film, it's Belle, and Emma Watson. So, I'm the kind of person who thinks that, in general, the actor is not responsible for what's going on in the movie, because most of the time, an actor just does as he's told, because the director's the real boss here. He's the one who manages everything, and it's his vision you see on screen. So, here's the thing. I was actually very optimistic about Emma Watson as Belle. But the way Belle was handled it really shows how important Belle is. Like, there are so many people who complain about how she doesn't get enough character development, and, she essentially stays the same compared to the Beast, but, she's truly the heart of the movie, and in order to really understand, well, we need to look at the original versions of fairy tale. So, Beauty and Beast is based off the myth of Eros and Psyche, not Hades and Persephone, really Eros and Psyche. And it probably had a few stories inspired from that myth, notably in folklore. But what made the Beauty and Beast tale famous when it appeared, if I can call it like that, in France, it was in France first from Gabrielle Suzanne de Villeneuve. It was later told also by Jeanne-Marie Le Prince de Beaumont, and that is the written version of the tale that is the best known to this day. As a little side note, the village in Beauty and the Beast is called Villeneuve as homage to Gabrielle Suzanne de Villeneuve. So of course, the story reflects the core values of its time. Belle, or Beauty, if you want to go by what she's called in English translations. She has a very strong sense of duty as a daughter, which we still see in the movie adaptation. So of course, she's the model of modesty and humility, especially compared to her older sisters, because yes, Beauty has brothers and sisters in the original tale. And the older sisters are, they're shallow, they're snobby. However, one thing that's different is that while Belle and the Beast relationship doesn't start so well in the animated movie for understandable reasons, it's different in the tale. So, Beauty is immediately mistress and queen as soon as she arrives in Beast's castle, and the Beast always treats her with utmost respect. And most importantly, she's clearly mistress of her own choices, as she makes the decision of taking her father's place at the Beast's castle. The Beast asks her each evening in marriage, to which she always refuses, which, while he respects her refusal. And keep in mind, we live in a time where it's all arranged marriages, and the girl didn't really have much of a say about who she married or not. So, what makes her win in the end is her feminine qualities and virtues, which are not shown as something that makes her weaker or lesser, but it's shown as a strength and something she has to be proud of. And that in itself, considering that in a couple of centuries before, women were seen as weaker because of what their core qualities and virtues were as a general rule, it's actually a bit revolutionary in itself. So, when it comes to the animated adaptation, while it's not, of course, entirely faithful to Mesdames de Villeneuve and Le Prince de Beaumont's tales, they did bring a few changes because, of course, the audience has changed, and the way women were viewed has changed as well. So, they made Belle bookworm, which is a homage of sorts to the women who first wrote her. Um, and they came from a time in France where it was really a golden age, and women's education was something that was actually valued because they needed to shine in society, and having a good education was therefore very important. Because the brightest jewels, if I can say it that way, were the ones who were the smartest and wittiest. And it's the kind of society a few centuries earlier Anne Boleyn grew up in, and well, that's how the French court was. It didn't work so well at the English court for obvious reasons and with a tragic outcome. So, Belle is educated, she reads a lot, and it's something that puts off the village a bit. Not so much because of the fact she's educated and that she reads, because as I explained, that shows you are from a higher rank in society, or at least you aim to reach it because you're ambitious. You want to marry well, because that's how it was for women back then. Either you became a nun, either you got married. They are, however, people from a modest standing, so not only they're a bit intimidated by the fact Belle is educated, but she isn't that interested in, solid, sensible things. And as they sing in Belle's introduction number, she's got her head in clouds, so she's a bit of a weird girl. It doesn't help that her dad is, the local mad genius inventor. And in consequence, she feels pretty lonely because apart from her father, no one can really understand her. They're not at the same level as she is, and that's not because she's snob. And she seems to be fairly friendly with everyone, but just because you get along with everyone doesn't mean they're friend material, because obviously, you befriend people with the same interests. In the live action movie, however, that changes. Instead, Belle is quite obviously an outcast, and some villagers are even openly hostile to her, and they even deliberately sabotage her work because, yeah, Belle here is into STEM because reasons, like, sure, why not? Even if we see it like once in a movie and it's never mentioned again, and she legit invents the washing machine just because. And so, yeah, the villagers basically sabotage her work just because she's teaching a little girl how to read, because yes, girls were allowed to read in the Dark Ages, only boys went to school. So, yeah, so obviously not everyone could afford an education, and it did happen that boys' education was prioritized over girls when choice had to be made. But to say that girls in France were forbidden to learn how to read is just ridiculous and so wrong. And you can just really tell the movie was made by American and British people. And it's not even a country versus city mindset. I mean, France was never like that. And you may tell me, like, well, it's a fairy tale, who cares? But it does matter for two reasons. It matters when you try to rewrite history in order to make modern days look better, and more particularly, it matters when you try to make your character look better. And the live action Beauty and the Beast threads a very thin line between fairy tale and reality, because there's definitely an overall feeling of, look, that's how it was back then, but look ahead of her time Belle is and how so much better the present day is. And here's the thing, when it comes to how women were treated, of course it's better than before. We all know that. We're not idiots. We know women were allowed to vote. We know women at some point couldn't attend university and occupy certain jobs. We know that women couldn't be single apart from some very specific circumstances, and that they either had to be married, either they became nuns, and even then, that was only in Catholic countries. But the problem is when you go back and rewrite history to make a point. Look, I'm a former French lit student. The fact that there were so many influential women in literature is something I'm very proud of. I'm proud of the fact one of the earliest feminist works was written by Christine de Pizan back in the 15th century. I'm proud of how the first novels in French were written by by women, sorry. And I'm really talking here about the modern novel as we know it. So the thing is, each country kind of had their own discovery of the novel. Well, the modern novel as we know it. So in Spain, it was Cervantes with Don Quixote. And in France's case, it was women. So it was a woman called Madame Lafayette who wrote what is considered the very first psychological novel. Mademoiselle Scudéry developed the first slow burn romances we all know and love in fanfic. And those novels had many complex female characters that still fascinate people today. I look at the greatest playwrights in French literature, Molière, Corneille, Racine, well, particularly Molière and Racine, and they may have been men, but they wrote their plays in order for their muses, who were women, to have great leading roles, and I could honestly name so many more, but they're just a Google search away. And what offends me is that no one even bothered to check out what France had to offer in the 17th and 18th centuries, which is honestly an enormous mistake, because French culture was to 17th and 18th centuries what American culture is today. French was the language of power, like English is today. And French architecture, art, literature, it was admired across Europe. But nope, France was like those 17th century Puritan villages in New England where you'd get burned at the stake for being a woman who knew how to read. So yeah, obviously I'm exaggerating, but you see my point. And Belle's favorite play is Romeo and Juliet by Shakespeare. Yet another proof of how very British this movie is. Just so the beast can be all, ew, a love story, why? Don't give me the cooties. Because, yeah, France didn't have any authors of note that you could name instead. And seriously, why did it have to be Romeo and Juliet? So, yes, it bothers me that you'll rewrite history while not bothering to look how women's conditions actually were, and that you'll then erase everything women have accomplished in that time. And I know it's a mistake Hollywood does all the time, and I know I shouldn't complain about this considering what people from minorities have endured in the past, but there's something very pernicious on how you want to send a feminist message by rewriting history and stomping at the same time on women who actually played a role in that time. And just to make you understand, for all my American and British listeners, how would you feel if I told you Jane Austen, the mother of romantic comedies, Charlotte and Emily Bronte, the most important figures of Gothic literature, Mary Shelley, the creator of horror sci-fi, Louisa May Alcott, George Eliot, Elizabeth Gaskell, Frances Hodgson Burnett, Christina Rossetti, Emily Dickinson, Mary frickin' Wollstonecraft, all of them didn't count because they were born at the wrong time. So everything they accomplished didn't matter. You wouldn't be too pleased. So you kind of see what I mean now? And then there's Belle. And we have to be reminded at every single turn how ahead of her time and how cool she is. And look, the ahead of her time trope can be done very well. What is pretty annoying though is that when you use it to put your character on a pedestal, and the pedestal kind of feels unwarranted because you just constantly boast about how awesome she is compared to everyone else who's just so retrograde, it gets annoying really quickly. And it's a trend that's fairly common in historical young adult novels. You have the fearless heroine who hates wearing dresses, wears pants, and rides her horse, and doesn't bother with needlework like her mother and her sisters because she's so much better than them and she's not like other girls. Duh. And, characters like Arya and Sansa Stark, they kind of toy with that stereotype while deconstructing it. And again, the girl ahead of her time trope can be done pretty well. And one of my favorite movies of all time is Ever After, which is basically a retelling of Cinderella. And the main character, Danielle, who's played by Drew Barrymore, she's kind of that type of character. However, they give context within the Renaissance period where the movie takes place of why she has the ideal she has and why she has that outlook. So that movie is really anything but historically accurate, but it's done in a way that doesn't bother me for the simple and good reason that you feel like the people who wrote the screenplay loved the time period where the story takes place. And as for myself, who knows how much the Renaissance changed the face of the world forever, I can see all the homage sprinkled throughout the film, and I can see it's really a love letter to the Renaissance period. And Danielle might be somehow ahead of her time, but she's still somehow a woman of her time, or the true Renaissance woman. And Belle could have been the embodiment of France's golden age and how much education and literacy were valued even for women. But instead of being appreciative of that time, they just drag it through the mud, all for Belle to show how better she is than all this and how cool she is. And of course, she's too cool for wearing corset. Ah, the corset. That instrument of torture created by the patriarchy to force women and have them choke and faint to keep them forever weak. Yeah, sure. Well, I'm gonna tell you a little secret. Corsets are not uncomfortable. Yeah, they're uncomfortable if you tie them super tight in order to look like you have a really tiny waist like Scarlett O'Hara or something, and yeah, you'll probably faint because you can't breathe anymore because, yeah, it's too tight. But if you don't tie them super tight, well, you'll stand very straight, and it does wonders to your posture, but it's not uncomfortable. And corsets only became uncomfortable in the very early 20th century during the Edwardian era. And those corsets were torture because they forced whoever wore them to have this really weird posture that was natural, but fashion said so. Because here's the thing, bras weren't widely used before the 30s. Corsets were the equivalent of bras. They were underwear. Every woman wore one. Also, as a side note, I know for a fact most 18th century dresses, including court dresses, had pockets to carry stuff like, a fan or tissues. Those pockets were basically two little pouches holding on a ribbon which you would tie around your waist before putting all the skirt's layers over them. And there were holes on top of each layer of skirt which were hidden among the folds of fabric so women could access their pockets. And women from lower classes had pockets on their aprons. By the way, we're supposed to be living in a post-feminist era and most dresses still don't have pockets, so what's good? And see, this is why you should let a costume designer do her job and design a costume, and not have the actress nitpick about it because, you know what? Costume designers spent years studying that shit in university. You didn't. And this is why people hate having their profession explained to them. So, that's why we ended up with a dress that was very Emma Watson instead. And from the few previous times she designed stuff herself and how not very successful this was, do you really think taking over for reimagining one of the most iconic dresses of all time is a good idea? So, for this part of the podcast, I tried being as objective as possible, but I'm sorry. The dress looks like a $70 prom dress you buy at Forever 21. And the yellow color doesn't look bad, but it's not the kind of yellow that fits anyone, and Emma doesn't really pull it off, sadly. You kind of have to be Mal Clooney or Lupita Nyong'o for that kind of yellow. The skirt just looks so sad, and first time I saw it, the one thing I told myself was banana peels, which is not good. And I will repeat, who thought it was a good idea to put glue glitter on the skirt? So that part where Madame Gallerov just sprinkles of glitter on the dress and it's all cute and magical. I actually held myself from laughing out loud. The magic of glue, folks, brought to you by Disney. Like, okay. I get it, it's a movie about a fairy tale, and no, I'm not asking that Belle should have worn those huge dresses they worn in the 18th century, because, yeah, you can take a few liberties. But this dress, it's for a film with a $150 million budget, which is more money than I will ever earn in my entire life, even with a university degree. And it just looks cheap and out of place compared to all the other characters' costumes, because the rest of the costume design is gorgeous, and Belle's entire wardrobe just sticks out like a sore thumb. So, of course, I don't think Belle would be a fashion victim with impossible dresses. I really don't see her as the material type, and that's the point of the entire character. And yes, she'd go for something practical in her everyday life, but she's also someone who takes care of her appearance, not because she's frivolous, but because she has this dignity about her. She knows the village thinks she's a bit strange, but that's not an excuse for her to not have this elegance and this dignity about her. And there's a clear difference between wearing something that's practical and smart and going around the village with your skirt off, showing off pants, because of course Belle would wear pants. The world was just not ready for it. Because, seriously, yeah, there were women at the time who went around with their skirt up and showing off the pants underneath. Except those pants were underwear, and those women were prostitutes. And look, I don't want to have people in the comments yelling at me about double standards or slut-shaming sex workers. That's not my intention. Except that for anyone who watches the movie and sees Belle running around with her underpants visible, and has a minimum of knowledge about costume history, you can't help but think about the unfortunate implications. And sure, tell me it's to make getting on a horse easier, but seriously, anyone who thinks that obviously never rode on a horse Amazon style. And riding Amazon style has you wearing a long skirt, which you do not need to lift up to get on a horse, and horse riding Amazon style was rather very, very common in France at the time, and every well-bred lady knew how to ride on horseback. And seriously, what's with Belle running around from the angry mob to get the beast in her underwear? Like, I get it, the point of Belle's ugly skirt was her being awesomely practical and crazy prepared in case she'd have to leave the ball in a hurry on horseback, because hey, maybe the Sakura will decide the French Revolution to shit out this film earlier than planned, because they decided Belle's dress was a bigger outrage than Marie Antoinette's wardrobe. Like, it's a ball gown. You dance in it. If you have to leave the castle in a hurry, you change. That's a practical thing to do, and this movie tried so hard to make Belle so practical. Like, seriously, what was with that ugly train the dress had? It distracted me during the entire ballroom scene. Not good. And yet, so Belle frees herself to go rescue the beast and throws her dress away after all the efforts Madame de Garde put into it, because feminism, and I guess Jacqueline Durand needed a bigger punch in the gut. And she arrives at the castle in her underwear. Like, what's the thing about Belle running around showing off her underwear? What's her thing for underwear? She doesn't even understand how corsets work, for God's sake. And the funniest part in all this is when she comes out of the castle with the beast, who's now been turned back into a prince, they're both in their underwear. And the prince just has this big, dumb smile on his face, and no one is bothered by them. Even if any sane person would probably just assume that those two, well, they just had sex. Right there, right now, and it felt so good. But the real question anyone seeing that would ask themselves, though, would be, did they do it before or after? Don't ask me to explain this one. No, actually I will. Like, for sure, there's at least one villager that said, always thought Belle was a weirdo, but never would have guessed she was an actual fairy. Okay, I think I've said enough about costuming issues, and thank God it didn't win Best Costume at the Academy Awards. But what does annoy me is that looking at the concept art, Belle's clothing actually looked like 17th, 18th century clothing. It was simple, it was elegant, and it wasn't over the top. But that changed. And we got something that just didn't fit with the rest of the costumes at all, and it's just jarring. And one of the reasons why I'm passionate about this is that I know about Jacqueline Durand's previous work. She did a costume for Pride and Prejudice, Anna Karenina, Atonement, and yeah, her costume design isn't always 110% historically accurate, but she sticks to a certain theme and aesthetic and she makes it work. Belle's wardrobe just doesn't feel like her at all because it sticks like a sore thumb. And sure, Belle needs to stand out and look different, but it just doesn't work. And honestly, if it was up to me, I'd have everyone in Village dress in 18th century clothing and Belle dress in Regency clothing. You'd get a nice Jane Austen reference right there, since this movie is so very British. And yes, it does matter because that kind of thing can ruin a costume designer's career. Seriously. If you care so much about your ego trip that you don't give a crap about another woman's career, the fact that you brought all those changes in the name of feminism makes you look like a hypocrite. I feel so much better. But the movie overall, it's a symptom of how Disney kind of tends to throw shit at what is one of their most successful franchises, which is the Disney Princesses franchise. And look, I will admit that there is some criticism that can be made about the Disney Princesses franchise. But one thing that we can see is that there has been an evolution since a film like Snow White and Seven Dwarfs. We've seen princesses becoming more and more proactive, tracing their own destiny. And yes, you can poke fun at certain tropes, but when you start downright bashing, this is when I have to roll my eyes. So, we're going to get flack for saying this, but it's something Frozen has done overall pretty well, in my opinion. You know, taking things easy in love and not falling in love with the first guy you meet, and so on and so forth. Brave is another great example because you got the tomboyish, rebellious, so not a princess who shows her former princess classic, now queen mother, to just have more fun. Just like she learns that her mom is awesome in her own way. But there are also poor ways of doing it. Like, I love Moana, but it did make me roll my eyes that Moana is more offended by Maui calling her a princess than a little girl. We get zero reaction from her when he calls her little girl, despite being used since she's very young to have very adult responsibilities and care for others, but when he calls her princess, ho ho, you made a mistake, hon. She's the daughter of the village chief, not a princess. Get woke, Maui. And since Belle in this movie is the coolest girl to ever cool in the world, and that of course she isn't a princess, it's actually pretty darn funny she ends up becoming a princess. So, Disney, stop apologizing about a franchise that brought you billions and billions of dollars, because it sounds so fake. Because Belle's character basically centers on the good old I'm not like other girls trope. It's one thing not to conform to what other girls do in general, and it's fine. I mean, just look at Mulan. But you start making it look like it was a competition that, being different makes you superior and that other girls are stupid because they're not like you. Like, it's not cute. You just look like a prick. And I'm not going to go and start chanting, women should support each other no matter what. Like, sure, there are some women who are toxic and you should stay the heck away from. There are some women you just won't get along with because, well, you're different and you just don't have much in common. But just because you're different doesn't give you a right to act like you're exceptional. If you're going to be condescending with other women because they like frivolous feminine things or because they don't like frivolous feminine things, well, they're not gonna like you very much either. Support and respect goes both ways. So I'm starting to wonder if the reason why the village doesn't like Belle is not so much because she's different, but because she's so obnoxious about it. It, unfortunate implications, hello. And there was this to an extent in the original fairy tale and in the animated film, but here it's just so ham-fisted and you just can't help but roll your eyes. No, I think I'm gonna call this Belle Hipster Belle from now on. But overall, I don't know to what extent Emma Watson had executive input on Belle. The fact that she got to decide about the wardrobe is telling. And the worst part is that her performance overall was just not very good. You know, she can't sing, her voice has no power, it's clearly auto-tune, and it's painful to listen to at times. Like, I actually think Gerard Butler did a better job as the Phantom in Phantom of the Opera, which is honestly saying something. Her acting is just, it either feels forced and contrite or just blank. And I know there was a lot of CGI involved, so that makes things understandably difficult for actors, but you know, there comes a point where my tolerance level, you just go beyond my tolerance level, and I just can't anymore. Otherwise, Dan Stevens was okay. He looks the part as the prince. He's totally got the right eyes for the role, and he and Emma Watson just had no chemistry, and CGI doesn't excuse it because they were still acting with each other. It wasn't like one wasn't there or whatever, and the relationship between Belle and the Beast also loses a lot of the charm it had in the animated version. I mean, it's not like Léa Seydoux and Vincent Cassel in the 2014 French adaptation where they had zero chemistry and you just didn't understand why Beauty fell in love with the Beast. And here, it's not a case of the two of them not getting along at all at first and then slowly warming up to each other by trying to make the other happy and bring out the best in each other and sympathizing with the fact that they're both little weirdos who are trapped each in their own way. And you know, it all ends up with the Beast finally realizing that he needs to let Belle go. And here it's just snark, 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 and it's not even entertaining. And you know, that kind of dynamic works when, you know, it's a screwball comedy and your actors have good chemistry. I mean, just think of Han Solo and Princess Leia. So, you know, it comes off as playful. Here, all you want to say is meh. Like, even the whole thing with the magic book falls flat because the book is such a deus ex machina, it hurts. And it brings in tons of plot holes more than anything else. It's literally mentioned once, and we never see it again. Like, seriously, why doesn't Belle use it to go and rescue her father when he's in trouble? And at first, I thought I could give them kudos for showing Belle actively trying to escape at the beginning, but again, it falls flat because it makes her look like a dumbass. Sure, Belle, make a rope with the sheets, go down the tower and steal a horse. But what tells you the Beast isn't going to come for you and your father and kill you both? You didn't think this through, girl! And it makes sense for her to run away when Beast scares her shitless because she's panicking and might not be thinking this through, but for before, come on. And ultimately, that's why I just can't get attached to Hipster Belle. There's nothing warm about her. Her entire point is that she's brave and won't let anyone make her feel less than she is, but she's also compassionate and selfless. Here, her compassion is next to non-existent because there's this underlying feeling it will make her weak, and honestly, it pisses me off. I could start ranting on examples of women who had a darn backbone but were still compassionate despite it all. Just look at Wonder Woman, look at Commander Shepard if you play a Paragon Femshep. Just look at Nakia from Black Panther, Christine Daae, Rey. Their compassion is not a weakness, it is their strength, and that's what makes them go forward. So, just so you see what I'm getting at, I'm going to compare Beauty and Beast with the 2015 live-action Cinderella. So, for the latter, there were obviously similarities with the original animated film, but already from start, Cinderella had a better director, and that is Sir Kenneth Branagh himself. And yeah, Cinderella was a remake, but it still managed to be its own thing without being a shadow with the animated film. And that's something Beauty and the Beast absolutely did not manage to do. So, while we're still on Cinderella, Emma Watson had been offered a title role but refused. The reason was that Cinderella isn't empowered enough. And it's at that moment I got really angry and I said out loud, wow, screw you. Because, sure, a girl who loses both her parents, gets everything taken away from her, and has to live through abuse, but never becomes embittered because she's just that kind and just that brave, isn't empowering enough. And a cynical part of me is pretty sure that her response would have been that Cinderella should have been more rebellious against her stepmother, and my pissed off self reply is pretty much, sure, I'm certain Ella would have been willing to be all rebellious and risk to lose the roof on top of her head just to show how awesome she is, because Lady Tremaine is perfectly capable of kicking her out. And it's not like she never stands up to Lady Tremaine, she does. She just doesn't have the subtlety of a rhinoceros because she's smart, believe it or not. So, yeah, it's pretty hilarious Cinderella ended up being a way more female positive film than Beauty and the Beast was. And while we're on Cinderella and Lady Tremaine, we need to talk about Gaston. So, Lady Tremaine in the 2015 movie is still a horrible person, don't get me wrong. She emotionally abuses Ella, encourages her daughters to do the same, forces her to work as a servant, and it's kind of unclear whether she's paid or not. And yet, it helps that she's played by Cate Blanchett, of course, but the movie succeeds in making her somewhat human, and that makes it all even more horrifying. She hates Ella because she sees her younger self in her, except Lady Tremaine became embittered by life by losing her husband, whom she seemingly loved, being forced to fend for her daughters and face an uncertain future, and marrying a guy, who was nice, but whose heart still belonged to his dead wife, and he preferred his daughter from his first marriage, and she lost her second husband again, and she let her fear and her anger get to her, and she saw how ugly the world can be. So in order to protect herself, she contributed in making the world even colder and crueler than it already was. Ella doesn't, because her mother's last words to her were have courage and be kind. Lady Tremaine had no one to tell her that. Ella doesn't reply to hate with hate, she replies with kindness, because she's determined to be the better person no matter what. And just because she's miserable doesn't mean everyone else around her has to be. And then there's Gaston. In the live action film, they somehow managed to make him an even bigger jerkass than he is in the original animated film, and not in a good way. So, in the animated film, Gaston is pretty much a two-dimensional cardboard misogynist who thinks being masculine is being a big macho jerk. You see the type. So, he's more often than not comic relief, not as much as LeFou though, and he's pretty much a foil to the Beast. They both start as arrogant, self-centered jerks, except the Beast learns to become kind and selfless. Well, Gaston, he doesn't. So, in a live action movie, Gaston at first, in the first interaction he has with Belle, he doesn't seem like a bad person, but that doesn't mean he's decent either. He's still stuck up who invades Belle's personal space way too much. Well, actually, there's such a jarring difference between Gaston's first interaction with Belle and his second. And the reason why I'm saying that and why, in my opinion, they kind of fell on this, I'm going to come back on it later. Basically, I'm going to talk strictly about the first interaction. And keep in mind that what would have worked better in that first interaction would be if Belle didn't know what Gaston's true intentions were. Because, when he says to LeFou that, oh, Belle is like a prize to be won and everything, straight away that it's not someone Belle would want to end up with. But still, in that first interaction, if you ignore everything that was said before and straight after, he tries his darn best to be charming, and he's not that dismissive of what Belle likes, even if he clearly doesn't really understand it, unlike the rest of her village, by the way. But, Belle's still comes off as unnecessarily rude to him in the very first scene we see them in, which is, well, not good. I mean, Lizzie Bennet straight out said no to Mr. Collins' marriage proposal, and even she was politer than Belle was. So the first scene when you introduce a character is key. Like, sure, you could argue that Belle and Maurice saw Gaston for who he really is, but a first scene for a character is there to establish who they are and everything. So that is very important. And the animated movie shows right away why Belle wouldn't like Gaston because, well, he's despicable. Here, eh. And because of that, there's this whole underlying feeling of Belle being all, I can't be with Gaston because I'm too good for him. While Gaston is all, I must have Belle because all the other men aren't good enough for her. And with the Disney Quaker Village from hell, it becomes one big dumpster fire, and honestly, it's actually more interesting to see the villagers, Gaston and Belle, tearing each other apart than Belle and the Beast falling in love with all that CGI and there's zero chemistry whatsoever. But Belle's dad is cool, though. I mean, it's Kevin Kline, too, and Luke Evans is good as Gaston, and you really get the feeling he actually has a musical theater background, unlike the two other leads. And just to come back, in Gaston and Belle's second interaction, just after, like, the village basically destroyed, like, her washing machine, because that's what it is, you see a clear difference. Like, he's still throwing around his nice guy card, you know. I mean, I know a lot of my viewers are probably already cringing just by me mentioning nice guy, but, you know, he gets a lot more in her personal space. He grabs her skirt, which is not good, and it's like, after that first interaction, it's like they're trying to throw in your face, like, look, he's a jerk, can you see he's a jerk? And it's just so jarring compared to the first interaction. And, I mean, of course, I shouldn't really say that, because, again, he's a complete buffoon slash caricature in the animated film, but, you know, he starts out as, you know, pretty over the top, and he ends up pretty over the top. While in the movie, it's like, especially when later on, when Gaston simply proposes himself to, you know, help Maurice find Belle, even if Maurice pretty much tells this completely unbelievable story, and, you know, everyone thinks he's crazy. I mean, of course, he's not disinterested by doing that. I mean, obviously, he's doing it because he wants to marry Belle. But still, he just has this complete turnaround when, you know, Maurice tells him, like, Belle will never end up with you because I see you for who you are, I mean, and Maurice has basically no basis to support his claim, and Gaston, because he's evil, he just ties him up in the forest and leaves him there to die, which, again, it doesn't give the character anything more. It just makes him look even worse, and for basically no reason at all. Like, dude is a misogynist who doesn't give a crap about what Belle wants or how Belle feels towards him. And I mean, later in the movie, in the climax, he tries to kill the Beast, and I mean, was that really necessary? And it's the kind of thing that's like the magic book. I mean, it's there for shock value, and it just brings more plot holes, more a big Deus Ex Machina, and it just, one thing that could have been a way of really improving Gaston's character would be really to go big and just turn him into Wickham. Have Belle actually like him at first until she realizes how much of a grade A piece of shit he is. That would be amazing, and that would be an amazing callback to the movie by Jean Cocteau. Honestly, I should do a podcast just about that movie because it's amazing, and if you haven't seen it, I strongly suggest you do. It's really great, really eerie, and probably the best version of the Beauty and the Beast tale that has been done until now. And otherwise, no, I will not talk about LeFou, except that he's the prime example on how to not insert a gay character. I probably shouldn't say this because I'm not LGBT myself, but still, and I will not talk about how the backslash on how LeFou's sexual orientation was handled, because all the news outlets said it was all conservatives who were yelling. Well, a lot of people in the LGBT community had concerns that proved to be sadly true once the movie came out, and no one mentioned them. And that's just another proof that the Mouse House doesn't care about your diversity. And otherwise, to add something very brief about the Enchantress, she should be renamed Lady Plothole and no one would notice, but honestly, she was all over the place, and sure, she was pretty morally ambiguous already in the original animated movie. Kind of based on the principle of fairies love screwing up humans when they're pissed because they're petty as fuck. But you really had to go ahead and make her a designated hero? Like, sure, give the beast a magic book that can allow him to go anywhere, but no, he can't. He's a beast, and of course Belle can't use that book to go back to the village. And sure, curse the servants to die even if they had nothing to do with refusing you shelter. I mean, they didn't raise the prince, right? Is that your reason? Like, what kind of messed up logic is that? Do you really think servants would have had any say in a freaking royal's education? Like, what does Chip have to do with it? Madame de Garde-Robe, Cadenza, sure, do nothing against Gaston even if he tried to murder Maurice and you saved him. And even if he's just as bad or even worse than the beast ever was. And why the heck would you pose as a beggar woman in the village you cursed? Like, if the Enchantress became some sort of blue and orange morality, evil matriarch who rules the village, it would have made more sense, and it would have made the story so much better. And just how the curse happens in the first place. She just barges in, interrupts the party, and then asks for shelter. And sure, the prince could have been a wee bit nicer, but it does make everyone look like they were doomed to fail. And again, it would have worked if the Enchantress was set up as morally ambiguous. Here, we're clearly meant to see her as heroic, and it just doesn't work. And I'll say this. One thing I noticed on Tumblr is that the servants became kind of the ensemble dark horses of sorts, and people cared more about Lumière and Plumette or Madame de Garde-Robe and Cadenza than they cared about the leads. And that is actually really hilarious. But anyway, I could go on for hours and hours, but I think this is long enough. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. Honestly, this podcast feels like a mess, but I had to do it one day or another because I'm an absolute perfectionist, and I admit, English is not my first language, and I think that it kind of shows from time to time. My first language is actually French. You might have guessed since I did mention I was a former French Lit student. Anyway, if you have any questions, objections, if you disagree with anything I said, please leave something in the comments. I've also put my email and my Tumblr in description below if you want to send anything that way, and I'll answer everything the best I can. I might do a Q&A at the end of each episode, so you can send it all for that. I might make myself a Twitter too, so I'm still thinking about it. It might come. As for the release of other episodes, I don't want to promise anything from the start. I'll do my best to have at least 2 a month, though I can't guarantee anything. I'm a full-time student with a job, but I'll really do my best to get committed. And anyway, I hope you enjoyed this and I didn't bore anyone, so talk to you soon. Bye!